So I'm Brendan MacLean. I was the initial developer, now the principal developer of the Skyline project. I guess this session has the name Skyline. How many of you have actually used Skyline? Okay, that's fair. And how many of you have not used Skyline? Make sure everybody can raise their hands. Okay, and then. Okay, so, well, I guess I'm just going to give you a pretty brief presentation just to give you a sense of what Skyline is. You're going to be using it here in this course, but probably you won't learn everything about it, and this will also give you some resources for learning more and understanding what it can do. So, just at the most basic overview or the high-level overview of Skyline, it started with SRM, with the CVTAC study that Sue just described, and it was its first 3 years of funding came from that project, and it was all SRM until we decided, well, actually. I remember having a conversation with Mike McCoss, my boss at the University of Washington, and I was like, wow, I think this Skyline thing is really, pretty good for what it does, but it's like a really teeny market, because, we're one of the top SRM triple quadrupole, proteomics labs, and we have one triple quadrupole, and so, but we have like 5 or 6 other instruments in the lab. So that's when we started thinking about how do we do the same thing on full scan mass spectrometers, just LTQs at the time. We did a paper with the Liebler lab at Vanderbilt about something that we called pseudo SRM, or I called it targeted MSMS, and it's now what we think of as PRM, parallel reaction monitoring. So it's just where it's very similar to SRM. You're just targeting some set of analytes on a full scan mass spectrometer, and then we moved pretty quickly also into just doing DDA chromatograph extraction from MS1. That's something that proteomics people have been doing for a couple decades now. So there have been tools around that extract chromatograms out of your MS1 scans. So if you have DDA, you've got MS scans that are getting collected in the hope of being used in an identification engine like Mascot or Sequest or something, and then you've also got these MS1 scans, and you can pull chromatograms out of those. And then finally, we were working with DIA from the perspective of doing identifications, and Mike had the idea, hey, let's try to extract chromatograms out of that data too. And then about 6 to 9 months later, the aerosol lab presented swath at ASMS, and then that really, things took off, and that's where we are today. I think of them in this little 2x2 grid where we have targeted methods, and so PRM and SRM are targeted methods. They require you pretty much to tell the mass spectrometer what you want to measure. Before you start the experiment, you have to give the mass spectrometer a set of targets, and Skyline's really good at doing that, supplying that information to the mass spectrometer. And then I think of survey methods like DIA and DDA, where you set up the mass spectrometer, you run it, and you collect a lot of information for a lot of potential analytes, but you don't have to know ahead of time what you're collecting information on. And then these methods have a selectivity benefit, or they have a selectivity trade-off in some cases. So with a high resolution mass spectrometer, PRM can be more selective, so that's going to give us lower noise, and so potentially higher signal to noise. Although we know that SRM with the triple quadrupole has a larger dynamic range. And then DIA is more selective than, that's one of the primary reasons people use DIA, is that it's more selective than just the MS1 spectra from DDA. And so, but in the end, it's all chromatography-based quantification. What we're doing is we're taking this three-dimensional space, like, you know, most mass spectrometry is this three-dimensional space of MZ, retention time, and then intensity, which we measure in ions per second. We extract a slice out of that, which, you know, at a particular MZ, that becomes a chromatogram. A tool like Skyline displays it like this, and then the area under these peaks we use as a proxy for quantity, right? So that's how we do quantification. There are other ways. There are other methods that people use, like spectral counting and isobaric tagging, like TMT and iTrack. Okay, long-winded on a single slide. I'll try to go a little bigger. Skyline itself, 10th year of development, as you said. My 10th anniversary at UW on this project will be on August 15th, exactly. There are now 7 developers on the project, over 500,000 lines of code. It's all open source. 60,000 lines of code for testing, so we write a lot of code to test our code, which is how we keep it as stable as we do, and I think there's good evidence that we've done a good job of keeping Skyline very stable. We have a lot of people, you can see this blue along the top is what we call Skyline Daily. That's people using whatever. I just dropped a release on Saturday. We drop them every couple of weeks. You can run this now side by side with Skyline, but about a quarter to a fifth of our users are using Skyline Daily all the time. And so we have over 10,000 registered users at this point, pretty close to 2,000 users using Skyline Daily, and over 8,000 instances started each week, 1,500 citations, and it's all funded by NIH, originally NCI for CBTAC, and then also the 6 instrument vendors are all contributing to it now too. It's become fairly important to the instrument vendors. It is cross-platform, cross-instrument, as Sue said. It allowed the CBTAC program to look at all their data in the same place. It also allows people who master Skyline to go from lab to lab and keep those skills no matter what instruments were being used in those labs. So this is, you might have noticed that this is a graph of usage. It's got, it's basically how many times Skyline gets started up. So it doesn't mean that it's a number of users or anything. It's hard exactly to equate to any specific thing. Someone might go weeks with a single instance of Skyline and never restart it, or somebody might open 10 documents in a day and start it up 10 times. So hard to, but in general, I think of it as being somewhat indicative of use. And I like to say that if I've learned one quantitative thing in the last 10 years, it's that not a lot of proteomics gets done between Christmas and New Year's. That's all. That's these things. On the very first year, I was kind of like, where did all my users go? I hope they come back. Thankfully, they did. So this is like last week sometime. This is our most recent release, 4.1, which you all installed. You can still see Skyline Daily. Maybe we've leveled off a little bit, but the proteomics community is only so big. So another graph that I created for Mike when he was asking a question about adoption is this one, which shows all of our releases and what percentage of people are on the most recent release. The gray line is including Skyline Daily, and the blue line is when you take Skyline Daily out of the equation. But yeah, in terms of evidence that we keep Skyline very stable, there's just that people use Skyline Daily at all, because if we were not keeping it very stable, who would want to get on this thing that changes every 2 weeks? And then also that we generally get up to 95% use of all of our users for every time we make a major release, which to me, I don't know. What version of Excel are you using? Anybody? Well, I guess now they have the sort of automatically updated, but I certainly have 2013 Excel on some of my computers. So I guess it's evidence both that we continue to, our new features continue to be relevant, so people don't just stay on the old release, and also that we're not breaking people a lot. Skyline's also very worldwide, so not only can you go to a new lab and not worry about their instruments, you can go to a new location and use Skyline. For a long time, it used to be only, mostly U.S. and Europe and Australia, sort of like, I think, of English-speaking places. We translated Skyline into Chinese and Japanese, and I've been traveling to India thanks to Sanjeeva there. I did my third trip there in February, and you can see there's a fair amount of usage there, and we're very proud that China and Japan have been using it a lot too. So now China is typically in this spot just below Germany and the U.S., and Japan is usually pretty high, and then Taiwan and South Korea also get into this top 10 fairly frequently. This is a zoom-in plot of Europe, and yeah, like maybe in the first 2 years, this plot looked like much fewer points. There are a few points. There was always a pretty big point here, which is Zurich, Switzerland. We collaborate with the Aebersold lab a lot, and they've always been our top spot in Europe. But people are now accessing the Skyline website from all over the place in Europe, and Germany was really, it's the top country. It was really the first place where we started to see, like, whoa, there's like 20 different places in Germany that people are using Skyline. This is the U.S. This is the most used spot is Seattle, and we have a bit of an advantage there. This is just website visits, so we probably just visit our own website a lot. But also this Cambridge, yeah. So that's the Broad Institute, MIT, Harvard, etc. Although Harvard Med School's over in Boston, so. But yeah, so we have Cambridge and Boston. So that maybe almost doesn't quite compare with Seattle though. But yeah, it's used all over the place, and if you learn Skyline, it's definitely a transferable skill for a mass spectrometrist interested in proteomics and now small molecule research. And I've heard of people going to a new lab and will email me and say, "Oh, I'm teaching my lab to use Skyline." Everybody, it's like everybody's really excited. So if you become an expert, it's actually I've heard of people. Someone got a job at SciEx, and their whole presentation was how they'd use Skyline to do some analyses. So that was a while ago. But yeah, also with the realization that we were one of the leading targeted proteomics lab with one triple quadrupole, and Skyline could only do SRM. I think we realized that targeted proteomics wasn't sort of a viral idea. It wasn't like Facebook or anything. It took a lot of teaching to get people to understand targeted proteomics and how to do targeted proteomics, how to apply it. And so we have started, in 2013, the Aebersold lab started the first week-long course, and we've been growing those. And so it looks like about 5 week-long courses and 4 to 5 workshops in the last 4 years, and then in 2018 things seemed to have kind of exploded, and I found myself turning down some stuff, but then also involving more people so that I don't necessarily have to go to every one of these, but I'm going to a lot of them. I've already been to, I guess the one that I missed was US HUPO, and I'm not going to be going to this one in Brazil, but mostly I go to a lot of these. We're going to do, I guess, 7 week-long courses. And I think IIT Bombay was a 4-day course. Lorne was a 3-day thing. So a lot of teaching and a lot of opportunities. If you want to come to another one of these, you're at one right now. 2.5 days, and then if you take the capstone, you get another 2.5 days at the end. So I went to one of these courses in Barcelona. One of my favorite quotes was somebody said, I realized I'm only using, this is somebody who'd actually used Skyline before, and then once they took the course, they said, I realized I'm only using about, 20% of what Skyline can do. And my response was, well, we only taught you a fraction of what's possible, so like you're probably actually only using 5%. So, but where do you go next, right? There's actually a ton of materials out here. There's 15 tutorials, 9 of which have been translated to Chinese and Japanese, so if you're more comfortable in one of those languages, they're there. There's also 17 webinars. Thanks to Nat. Nat came on and really helped us ramp up an effort to get a lot of content that was already present in the written tutorials or we'd been teaching in settings like this. We managed to get that out into tutorial webinars. So the webinars are designed for, each data set is presented with the tutorial, and you should be able to go follow along with them and learn more from the webinars. We're not just talking, we're not just talking and showing slides in the webinars. We're actually taking you through steps to use them. These are some statistics that I've had and Nat collecting about people visiting the webinars. A little bit hard to follow, but there are 17 of these webinars, and you'll have this slide. You can maybe learn some things, like I was just looking at this. What is this thing over here that was so popular and seems to have stayed very popular? Some of them were popular and then went down, are at a fairly low level, not that many people visiting them. This one is, I think, isotope label standard. So there you go. If you want, you can decide based on these levels what might be really interesting and what people are watching. And then this is just sort of total visits to these webinar web pages, which you can see have remained fairly popular. Again, Skyline is multi-instrument. These are the 4 instrument manufacturers that now support Skyline, and that because of that, you can expect us to support you in any use of their instruments. Skyline was just again at a high level. This is a slide I made the first year of doing Skyline, and this was me trying to summarize what we were trying to do after working with the scientists a little bit and seeing what they were doing. Was that we would take stuff that was coming out of discovery proteomics, which is what everybody was doing at the time, and then there was this whole process of targeted method refinement. It wasn't like you could just take this and go straight to quantitative assay. There were lots of steps in between, and we needed a tool that allowed us to go around this cycle many times. Do stuff like collision energy optimization, do a lot of the things like, okay, I'm going to measure 6 or 10 transitions and choose 3, and some of the stuff that Sue mentioned in her talk. But there was this whole process of refinement, and a mass spectrometrist might spend a lot of time over here, and so they needed a tool that supported that cycle. So Sue mentioned literature, which is a great way to start a targeted proteomics experiment, just deciding on some things. But then there's this whole area of discovery proteomics, and a lot of that is coming out of DDA acquisition. We're moving more to DIA. That's becoming a viable way to do discovery, which is really exciting. But at the time, and still, a lot of discovery proteomics is coming from DDA acquisition. And here are these, what people do with DDA a lot is this spectrum matching. And there's a whole lot of different pipelines and tools. And we've worked to make Skyline support all of those. So as an entry point into Skyline, if you're up here doing discovery with any one of those pipelines, you can now get that information into Skyline to start your targeted proteomics refinement. So then this became, we can have retention time libraries, which I'm going to talk about this afternoon, spectral libraries, broad methods, and previous measurements all going into this funnel of targeted method refinement. And then this is the targeted method refinement cycle, where you would build a method, run it on a mass spectrometer, evaluate the results, and refine and go around it again. And then what is this refine? Here are some things that you might be doing in any single cycle of the refinement, or you might be able to do multiple in a single cycle, but usually there's several cycles of refinement to get a fully quantitative assay. So you might be doing, measuring relative abundance. Just is the thing measurable? Are your molecules or your peptides, do they degrade? They're not going to be good quantitative, good for quantification if they degrade. You might want to be looking at their digestion efficiency under the digestion conditions that you're subjecting your proteins to. How many hours or minutes does it take to get your peptide up to its best digestion efficiency, and then, or does it trail off if you leave it there too long? And then scheduling and optimization, which we've talked about. Skyline has recently expanded into small molecule research. I guess we're not going to talk about that much here, but there's a whole webinar on it, and that's becoming really interesting. How many people do anything with small molecules? Okay, so yeah, you can now you can use Skyline for that too. You can do mixed experiments with both peptides and small molecules, and people actually use this small molecule, which I've been saying we should call it all molecules. People use it for cross-linked peptides. So things that are hard to define in the way Skyline natively defines peptides, even if they end up being peptide molecules, can be defined in this sort of generalized molecule support. Sue mentioned ion mobility as a possible way of getting another stage and higher selectivity, and we're working with now 4 of the instrument vendors on various ion mobility methods and enhancements to their machines. And here's an example of an experiment without any ion mobility filtering. You can see that there's this interference here on, I think it's the Y9, or Y8, the Y8. So, very obvious interference, no ion mobility filtering, but otherwise a really nice peak. And so this is what because this was collected with ion mobility, this is now we're working with I showed you a 3-dimensional space before. This is actually a 4-dimensional space where we're collecting 3-dimensional spectra over time. So I can't even really show it to you, but every spectrum is 3 dimensions because it's got a drift time to it. And then you can see that what we think of as a spectrum is sort of this horizontal line here where you see a lot of red. That's clearly some precursor that's been fragmented. And then Skyline allows us to zoom in and see, okay, here's the Y8, and you can actually see that there are two different molecules at different drift times. One's at about 40, and then the one we're interested in is about 25. And then so then Skyline allows us to define a filter. So based on prior information, we know that the drift time for this molecule is around 25, and so now Skyline's showing the filter. And if we go in a little bit more, now we can see this is the thing we're interested in. That's the Y8. Basically, Skyline's going to extract the signal out of this rectangular region rather than just a range of MZ. And then after we do that, this is what the signal looks like. So that really obvious interference is just gone. So that's another phase, gives us better selectivity, and there are 4 different instrument vendors working on various applications of ion mobility to increasing selectivity in Skyline. Skyline also has this incredibly flexible reporting system, which we call live reports, because they actually update with the Skyline data model instantly, and you can edit the Skyline data model with them, and pretty much anything you can see in any of the Skyline graphs you can get out of these reports. And there's tons of values, and you can choose them. This is all the brainchild of Nick Schulman on the team, who came from the Microsoft Access team. But if you're going to do any sort of statistical analysis of Skyline data, you're really going to want to understand the live reports and use them. Nick has recently even expanded live reports to do these pivots. So if you're familiar with Excel pivots, you can now do something like Excel pivots on the data that's in these reports. So it's an incredibly flexible, powerful system, which we've also, for a long time now, used to feed these things called external tools. And so a way that people who are outside of Skyline, who write code outside of Skyline, can write tools that enhance Skyline, and those are called external tools. You probably went here and installed Skyline for this course. If you look a little lower, there's this external tools link, and also you can get to it inside Skyline by going to what we call the tool store. So tools, tool store, and then you'll get this list of, these are the current list of external tools. MS Stats, the one you're going to learn the most about if you're staying past this one, if you're staying for subsequent segments. This is the tool created by the VTech Lab and Mina Choi, who you've probably heard from. Here, it's our most popular tool. These are the 6 most popular tools. You can see that MS Stats, which we teach in a lot of these week-long courses, has over 12,000 downloads. So, and probably you have or are going to download it if you're staying beyond this first segment. But all of these tools, or most of these tools, function by setting up a custom report, and then when you execute the tool ends up on the tool menu, like this SRAM collider is one of them. It has its own custom report. When you hit this SRAM collider button, Skyline generates a report and sends it to a website. And so with MS Stats, it generates a report and sends it to an R script. And so the reports feed these tools, and that's what makes these tools possible. Also, we have a website relational database platform called Panorama, which allows you to publish fully annotated Skyline documents. The document gets packaged up in a zip file and put up in a repository, and then it also gets split and put into a relational database. So you can do a lot of the same reporting and analysis functions based on what gets put in this database. Lots of people query it. Our NCI projects have it queried by remote servers. The CVTAC assay portal queries Panorama. There are probably more than 68 public data sets in something called Panorama Public. Actually, this says coming soon, but it was actually published in MCP. So Panorama Public, if you're going to use Skyline and then publish your results, you should really report all of your Skyline documents that you used for your experiments by posting them to Panorama Public. And that's actually the MCP guidelines for targeted proteomics now recommend a certain set of things which are all fully captured by Skyline and Panorama. You can also build something we call chromatogram libraries, which are a lot like spectral libraries, only they're created with targeted proteomics data. And then a very popular thing that a lot of people are interested in is actually doing longitudinal QC system suitability collection of data that Panorama supports as well. Panorama is also growing over time. You can get there's 295 different labs or groups that have a project on Panorama. So there's a panoramaweb.org website where you can request your own projects. I guess it's freely hosted version. We manage it at the UW. There are, I guess 295 separate projects. Those are the data sets. It's got completely user-controlled security, so you can control the security of your own project. You can share stuff with whoever you want, or keep it as private as you want. And then we also have the ability to get a locally installable server application. So this is a hosted version that we host. But if you're part of a group like these pharma companies where you want a private server inside your firewall, then that's also possible. But otherwise, all of the code is free and open source under Apache 2.0 license, like Skyline. And this is a schematic of Panorama. You're over here doing your targeted method refinement and everything, and then at some point you want to post it up to Panorama, which is a database that can be viewed through a web browser. It can also be queried for R or Excel or analyses, and you can do cross-experiment analyses. That Study 9 is all posted and on Panorama Public. So if you wanted to go look at the Study 9 Skyline documents, you could just go up to Panorama Public and do that. This is the Skyline team. Myself, Nick Schulman, who's done all the reports and is more and more our lead developer. Brian Pratt, who's working on the iMobility and small molecule components. Toby Rode, who's an intern with us, we're doing some pretty cool visualizations, and then actually right now working on audit logging, because we're hearing from a lot of people in regulated environments that they want audit logging out of Skyline. Vagisha, who started the Panorama project and remains very active in that as well, and just published the paper on Panorama Public. Matt, who's our, definitely our instructional guy, has made all the webinars possible, has made this, he's been very involved in this whole May Institute and a lot of our other instructional offerings, and also manages our localization projects, creating Japanese and Chinese content. Kaipo Tamura, who is the spectral library guy and also does our wizards for getting data from various sources into Skyline. And Yuval Boss, who is an intern, also an undergraduate at the University of Washington, and has created a lot of our testing tools and worked with a lot of those the people creating external tools.